Hello, I'm Corey Hello, and welcome to another episode of Critimation, where I review animated TV shows and films. As always, I do not own any of these films or shows. They are properties of their respected owners. Our first episode will be the Batman episode, Harley and Ivy. The episode begins with Batman chasing after the Joker and Harley Quinn in the Batmobile. And despite Harley accidentally handing the Joker the prop gun instead of a real one, they still manage to get away. Furious at the mistake Harley made, the Joker kicks her out. Wanting to prove herself, Harley decides to steal a diamond from a museum. But before she can be sneaky about it upon arrival, somebody trips the alarms. That somebody is Poison Ivy. When the police arrive, Harley uses some of Ivy's plant toxins she stole from the museum labs to gas the cops, allowing them to make their getaway. At Ivy's hideout, Harley Quinn is given a shot so she'd be immune to the poisons surrounding the area. The two criminals then become partners and start a crime spree, starting with crashing a men's club. Despite becoming the new queens of crime, Harley Quinn begins to miss the Joker, who at that very moment had learned about Harley's new success. Of course, it doesn't take long for Batman to catch on as well. The following night, Harley gives Joker a call to let him know she's okay, unaware that he is tracking her location through the call. After hanging up, Batman arrives, but Poison Ivy is able to trap him in one of her plants. Batman is then dumped into the toxic river nearby. Upon returning indoors, they learn that the Joker and his gang have arrived, who then proceed to rob them. However, the girls manage to escape, leaving the Joker and his goons to Batman, who managed to escape drowning. And just when it seems the girls have managed to escape, a female police officer manages to arrest them. With all the criminals in Gotham, Joker vows that he will not have any women in his next gang, though Harley remains hopeful. Now, one thing I want to point out about this episode is that it depicts a dysfunctional relationship between the Joker and Harley Quinn. Not only is the Joker abusive towards Harley Quinn, he believes that he owns her, as she always comes back to him. And yet Harley Quinn still has feelings for him. It surprises me that such a toxic relationship like this even existed within the Batman universe. But since she would eventually branch out on her own in the years to come, it definitely shows how much the character has grown in both the comics and in animated adaptations in general. Of course, the biggest thing about this episode is that it started the relationship between Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn. And of course, for those of you who watch the Harley Quinn TV show on Max, they would eventually become an official couple and get married. On top of that, the episode focuses on women empowerment as the two characters team up and work together to get out of tricky situations. There was definitely an emphasis on women empowerment and strength. And while Harley Quinn does go back to the Joker, it kind of plants the seeds of her eventual rebellion against him during their breakup. And even though Batman doesn't really appear until the end of this episode, I would recommend this to anyone who's a fan of the Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy team-up, as this would be the episode that started it all. Our next topic will be An American Tale for The Mystery of the Night Monster. The film opens with Pfeiffer having a nightmare about a fire-like cat monster chasing him. Because this has been going on for a while, Mama Masquerade suggests that Tanya take 502 to work with him, which happens to be a newspaper that covers the stories about a night monster, the same one 50 has been having nightmares about. Once there, they meet ace reporter Nellie Bree, who is based off of real-life reporter Nellie Bly, who serves as an undercover reporter for the newspaper. In the opening, it's even mentioned that she exposed a clothes factory for the mistreatment of their workers. Perhaps the very sweatshop factory that 50 was sold to in the original film. Per the orders of Nellie's boss, Reed Daly, who Tanya has a secret crush on, Nellie takes 50 to Chinatown where a monster attack has happened, in the hopes of getting him to conquer his fear of it. Telling him that once you know the facts about something, it helps make your fear go away. After interviewing a Chinese mouse, who is unfortunately portrayed in a stereotyped manner, they discover a small footprint that was left behind, suggesting that the monster is fake despite its suggested size. Once back in town, they meet a soothsayer poodle named Madame Musée, who claims to have a remedy to repel the monster. After several reported sightings of the monster, and a lot of nightmares, Nellie and 50 meet a Scottish mouse who has claimed to have survived the monster attack, and they also find a hairball left behind. That night, we learn that Musée is secretly working with a group of cats who have captured the missing mice through the use of the so-called monster. We also learn that the reason Musée is teaming with the cats is because a fence surrounds the mouse's town that keeps the cats from getting in directly. Upon learning about Nellie's report, Musée decides to set a trap for her. She does this by tricking Tony and Tiger, who are working for the newspaper as delivery boys, into getting 50 and Nellie to go to an abandoned house where the monster resides. However, the two are ambushed by the monster. Thankfully, Tony arrives and drops a chandelier on it. The monster, however, escapes through the sewers, leaving behind a piece of fake jewelry. The following night, the group head to Central Park where they meet a contact of Nellie, a member of a high dog council named Lone Wolf, who then shows them a lost dog poster, which upon closer inspection is of Musée. But when 50 returns home, he finds his town in flames. What's worse, his family's gone, and while Tiger gets help from the dog council, 50 and Tony discover an entryway into the sewer through Musée's gypsy cart. Inside, they find the lost mice, including 50's family. And while Tony floods the area, causing the cats to flee, and giving the mice a chance to escape, 50 goes further down into the sewers and discovers that Musée has infiltrated the press, holding Nellie, Tanya, and Reed hostage. She reveals that the reason she wants to get rid of the mice is because she's been compared to one, and that she ran away when her owners moved, but was stuck with the cats when the dog council rejected her. During this, 50 learns that the monster is just a machine, and after giving Musée a literal shock, the group destroy the machine, evade the 3 cats that operate it, and leave Musée in the dog's custody. Reed then proposes to Bree, much to Tanya's shock and disappointment, and the film ends with Musée returned to her owner, and 50 finally getting some well-deserved sleep. As mentioned earlier, Nellie is based off a real-life reporter, but I also noticed that her personality and accent were reminiscent of Hollywood star Katharine Hepburn, who was known for playing strong, independent, and mature women in cinema. Another cinematic reference I saw was the Soviet film Battleship Potemkin, directed by Sergei Eisenstein in 1935. Specifically, they referenced the Odessa Steps sequence, and while the film's famous use of montage was not present in this parody, film buffs will recognize the reference as there's a baby carriage going down the steps during all the chaos. Finally, I will give props to Candy Milo, who voices Musée, due to her ability to switch between accents, even mid-sentence. Basically, most of the time she has a French accent, but whenever she loses her cool or is sarcastic, she puts on a Brooklyn one. And while I'm pretty sure relying on accents for a voice actor isn't really that appropriate nowadays, I do think that it fits the character very well. On the downside, I was not in favor of how they portrayed Tanya of having a crush on Mr. Reed. The concept of having a child be in love with a older person is kind of inappropriate in my opinion. And I've been exposed to this in a few shows that I grew up on. Mainly Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, where Mac loves Frankie, and early seasons of The Loud House with Clyde being in love with Laurie. Thankfully they dropped this in season 5. And while I do think the usually courageous Fivo is out of character in this film, I do think that the whole face your fears concept is pretty good for this film, and I would recommend it to any young child. Just be aware of the negatives I mentioned before showing this to your child. Our last segment will be around the Powerpuff Girls episode, Bubblevicious. The episode begins with the girls in a training simulation, but when it's Bubbles' turn, she's put on a very low level because the professor thinks she's not ready for the higher levels. Wanting to prove that she can be taken seriously, Bubba sneaks into the control room that night and sets the level all the way to 11. At first she struggles to fight the horde of monsters, but the thought of being treated like a baby causes her to snap and go hardcore. After finishing the simulation successfully, she changes her personality big time. The next day at recess, Bubbles totally pins down Blossom during a game of Duck Duck Goose. Then, after receiving a call from the mayor, she totally beats up the person causing a traffic jam, or should I say, talking dog. When her sisters tell her that she's going out of control, Bubbles announces that she's going solo, and then begins beating up people for very minor things. This, however, leads her to get kidnapped by Mojo Jojo, the girl's arch-villain, who attempts to zap Bubbles with a laser so that her sisters will come flying to the rescue and straight into a trap. But upon doing so, Bubbles manages to break free and beat up Mojo big time. When her sisters do show up, they realize that they underestimated Bubbles, and the three sisters make up. This, without a doubt, is one of my favorite Bubble-centered episodes, especially since Tara Strong was phenomenal at portraying Bubbles' hardcore moments. In fact, almost every time she does her Bubba's voice for fans, she goes hardcore. And I would recommend this episode to anyone who's just beginning to watch the franchise for the first time. Thanks for tuning in to Critimation. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and follow me on Twitter, or support me on Patreon. I'm open to suggestions, and I will see you next time.